I am Matt Baird, President of the Lee Summit Chamber of Commerce, and we always look forward to doing these forums each election cycle. And so tonight we will be having the General Election Candidate Forum for the November 8th ballot. So again, I want to welcome you all, and again, on behalf of the Chamber Board of Directors, it's a pleasure to have you. We've got, I want to express our appreciation to the Missouri Innovation Campus and Rick Smetana for putting this on for us tonight and hosting us here in this beautiful facility. If you've never been through this facility, certainly get with Rick. It is a gem of our community. I also want to thank the following members who helped sponsor this evening's forum: AT&T, Missouri Association of Trial Attorneys, St. Luke's Health System, Lee Summit Tribune, and Spire. So again, I want to thank our sponsors for this evening. When you came in this evening, you may have noticed the table containing the candidate profile booklets. Those booklets provide information on each candidate and answers to questions that they were previously posed by the Lee Summit Chamber. So certainly make sure you take a look at those questions and answers. The forum is being live streamed tonight on the Chamber's Facebook page and is recorded, and the recording of the forum will also be posted on the Chamber's YouTube channel and website. So we will be live tonight, as well as it will be recorded. A couple of housekeeping items. There is water in the back, so please grab a water if you'd like one. Restrooms are also through the doors and to your right. We ask that you please set your phones on vibrate or mute. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderators for this evening. We have Kent Kirby, past chair of the Chamber's Legislative and Government Relations Committee, and Chip Tazinski, current chair of the Chamber's Government Relations Committee. Both of these fine individuals are active volunteers and members of the Lee Summit Chamber of Commerce. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Chip.
Good evening and welcome. I want to thank you for being here this evening. Before we hear from the candidates, I want to outline the format for tonight. Each candidate will be given 2 minutes for opening remarks. We will go in alphabetical order by district, starting with State Senate District 8, and we'll go in reverse order if time allows for final remarks. After the opening comments by the candidates, we will have a question and answer session. Questions have been generated by members of the Lee Summit Chamber and you, the audience. For those wanting to ask a question, when you came in tonight, there were pens and index cards on the round tables outside that you are to use. If you have a question, please write it down and hold your hand up, and a chamber representative will come by and pick it up. We ask candidates to keep their answers to 1 minute. Both the opening remarks and answers to questions will be timed. Once the alarm goes off, please be considerate and finish speaking. We ask the candidates to please honor the time allotments. If time permits, we will provide 1 minute to each candidate at the end of the forum for any closing remarks. Lastly, during the forum tonight, we ask that the candidates focus on answering the questions. Those that choose to make personal attacks will be warned. If a candidate is warned for a third time, they will be asked to leave and dismissed from the forum. So, in alphabetical order by district, the first person to speak will be Senator Mike Searpoint from Senate District 8, followed by J.C. Crossley, and then we'll move to the remaining districts. Senator Searpoint, you may begin.
Thank you. As he said, my name is Mike Searpoint. I've been in the Senate now. I've served 5 years. The last year of Will Krause's Senate seat, and then since 18 for the last 4. Before that, I was in the Missouri House, the floor leader the last 2 years of the Missouri House. As these folks are going to learn, and Carrie knows, when you first get to Jeff City, there is a lot of stuff to learn. You go down there with preconceived ideas, and many of them are accurate, and many of them you find are not. There's a lot more gray in this world than a lot of us would like to see, probably, but the facts are just that way. And one of the reasons I'm running for this election, it's my last time, and I'll have to term out after this. We need people in Jeff City that actually understand some of these issues, and the knowledge base, you get it over a period of years, but it takes a while to learn it because there's just so much to learn. I often say this, I'll quickly relate it. My first year in March, we were done early. I was in my office. My assistant came back to me and said, Mike, there's a guy here who wants to talk to you about elevator safety. He was from St. Louis, had a problem with elevator inspectors and unions. He talked to me for a while. I found out the state fire marshal had that responsibility. I took some notes. He left. A few minutes later, my assistant came back in and she said, Mike, there's a woman here. She wants to talk to you about breastfeeding. And I thought to myself, I don't know much about elevators, but I know less about breastfeeding. And so she came in and talked to me, and public breastfeeding was a thing. I didn't realize that. I took some notes. And after she left, I just thought to myself, what kind of a job have I got here? Because it's just the things that come through your door that you handle on the floor, and it jumps from thing to thing. It's just a lot to learn. And what I'm trying to say is, that's why one of the reasons I decided to serve one more term. I just think I really have a decent knowledge base now. I'm Commerce Chair. I'm handling things with utilities and other things. And it's really important that we have people in Jeff City so the lobbyists and the bureaucrats aren't the only people in the room that know what we're talking about. And so my 2 minutes are up, but thank you, and I'll talk later.
All right, thank you. Antoine Jennings, Senator Searpoy's competition, has been deployed with FEMA and is currently in Florida, and he will not be joining us tonight. District 30 candidates, Sonia Nizami and John Patterson, have both declined and will not be here tonight either. So now we'll go to J.C. Crossley.
Hi, I'm J.C. Crossley. I've lived in Lee Summit since 1959. My folks moved here from Iowa, and then we moved to Lee Summit. It was about 8,000 people when we moved here, and I don't know how many people are here now, but there's a lot more. And like I said, I went to school here. I went to work at Sharp Long Heating and Cooling, a local heating and cooling company, in 1976, and I worked there till 1988 when we bought the place. And I just recently sold a year ago this month. I sold the business, and I had thought I had retired. And I was asked in March if I would run for District 34, and I had never entertained the thought of doing such a thing because I've always just worked and not paid attention to what's going on around me, and I just worked. And I told the guy that asked me that, I told him I'd have to pray about it, and because it wasn't on my horizon. And about 3 weeks of praying and reading about what's going on, and I realized I didn't know anything about what's going on. And as I read more and studied more and asked more questions, I realized it is something I should do. At first, I thought I should do it out of, since they had nobody to sign up, I should do it out of duty. In the interim, I found it's something I really want to do. And I feel like I can take my life experience of running a business, of dealing with, I've dealt with thousands of people, literally thousands of people in their home. And I've had hundreds of employees over the last years that I've dealt with. And so I know how to work with people. And sometimes not the best of situations, and come out with a great outcome. So I feel like I can take that to Jefferson City. As you probably know, I'm a Republican. I have a conservative bent. I tend to look at things pretty simply, and my beeper's going off. Goodbye.
Hi, everyone. My name's Kemp Strickler, and I'm also running in District 34. I want to thank the Chamber for hosting this, and thank you all for coming. So a little background on me. I have lived here in Lee Summit for 36 years. This is where my wife Christy and I moved to right after we were married. We raised our daughter here. She's a proud graduate of Lee Summit High School. And it's a place that we love. We love being here. We love being a part of this community. And I'm running for office because I want to make sure that our state government is working on behalf of Lee Summit and all of our citizens. I do have, I think, leadership experience that will help me in the legislature. I've been on several advisory boards at the University of Missouri. I am the board moderator for my church, and I'm currently serving as the vice chair of the Lee Summit Arts Council. Professionally, I worked at Hallmark for 36 years before I recently retired. And while I was there, I led marketing research teams, data analytics teams, and I think that experience will allow me to go down to Jeff City and dig into the data and understand the data that's presented to legislators. It'll give me it's given me the experience that will help me talk to constituents and talk to subject matter experts to help find solutions to the challenging problems that we've got here in Lee Summit. So I hope I can earn your support. If you have questions after the night is done, my website's kempstrickler.com. Thank you very much.
Mr. Burrows?
Good evening. My name's John Burrows. I graduated Blue Springs High School back when there was only one. Went to University of Missouri, Kansas City, and got a degree in political science. And then joined the Army. I was in the Army for 8 years. I was a nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons specialist for the 102nd ARCOM. I am a Jackson County native, so to speak. We've got 5 kids that have gone through the school district here, 2 who are in the Lee Summit School District as we speak. I've got a background in education. I received my master's at Iowa State University in applied anthropology. And then I worked on my PhD at University of Georgia. I was an anthropologist. I was based out of East Africa, spent time in Nairobi. And I've owned my own businesses for most of my adult life. I do consulting in healthcare and insurance. I'm licensed all lines for insurance products. And one of the niftier things I had an opportunity to do, I was the account executive for the Kansas Municipality Insurance Trust. And this was a self-insured pool with 178 public entities in it, essentially cities across the state of Kansas. And our job was to manage their workers' compensation. So essentially we had claims handlers, and we were looking at ways to essentially do cost containment for these municipalities. 2 of my other clients were Unified Government of Wyandotte County and Jackson County, Missouri. So I do have experience working at the governmental level with regard to the basic meat and potatoes of, we have these risks. How do we control these risks and these losses? And beyond that, I joined Civil Air Patrol back in 1999. Civil Air Patrol is part of the Air Force. It's part of the Total Force. And I serve currently, I manage 7 squadrons, and now I'm at the national headquarters with Civil Air Patrol as the government relations advisor. And I have one question. The pen I got has no ink. If you could help me on that, I apologize. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carrie Engel, and I've been the state representative for the current district that you are in, House District 35, since 2019. And I am a licensed master social worker. And so that means that my job has always been to advocate for the most vulnerable in our communities and in our society, making sure that they have access to the services that they need, whether we're talking about the elderly, whether we're talking about children, whether we're talking about people with special needs. Those are the folks that I make it my job to advocate for, folks who generally don't have lobbyists at the table. As Senator Serpoy said, when you get to Jefferson City, you are often hit with a flood of information and special interests that are trying to always get your attention. I always try to put the focus of my intention and my work at the folks that I serve back here in Lee Summit and in Kansas City, and those folks who don't have lobbyists and representation at the table. During my time in Jefferson City, I've worked across the table to pass several pieces of bipartisan legislation, some unanimously through the House, that have put the care of children at the forefront of some of the laws that we've passed, whether it's residential facilities that had absolutely no oversight prior to our work in the House and the Senate, or work on the Sexual Assault Survivors Task Force and the Sexual Assault Survivors Bill of Rights. Those are the issues that I focus on in Jefferson City. But not just that, trying to hold my colleagues also accountable for things that we pass here in Lee Summit and that we pass here statewide, including Medicaid expansion, making sure that we're funding that like we told the voters that we would do. I think it's really, really important to hold power accountable. And in Jefferson City, we have a supermajority of Republicans. I try to bring balance to that voice, a moderate voice, a voice that reflects the community that I serve. And if reelected, I will continue to look at work surrounding that. Thank you.
Thank you all for your opening remarks. We would now like to move into the next phase of the forum, that being the question and answer portion. Audience members, if you have not submitted your questions, please turn them in. Because of our limited number of candidates, they will all answer the same question. We'll start with Senate District 8 and go from there.
Okay, so the first question, we'll start with Senator Serpoy. And are you willing to avoid the negatives in this campaign and focus on the positives? If so, please state one issue you plan to strongly support and your solutions for the issue. And are you willing to listen and work to compromise?
Yeah, I have found in Jeff City, if you're not willing to compromise, you'll get nothing. A lot of people will say it's this way or nothing, and they're right. It's going to be nothing. Yeah, one of the things I'm going to try to work on next year is something that I worked on last year. It's our child abuse statutes. It's a really difficult issue, and it's really hard to get it right because it is a real issue. A lot of kids in this state are treated terribly. But when they're wrong, when it's misdiagnosed, it is also very difficult for the families that have been misdiagnosed for. And what I've tried to do last year, I filed a bill after the family that I knew of that was involved was released from it. What we have to do is I've got to figure out some way to make the peer review system for what we call scan clinics like Children's Mercy Hospital, make their peer review system better. Because right now, most families, to get their kids back and to get their life back to normal, will sign anything. So they sign these agreements with the courts, and then Children's Mercy looks at those agreements and says, we did a good job, they signed this thing, when in fact they only signed it to get this meat grinder off of them. And so I've been reaching out to a lot of people trying to figure out a way to make that peer review process better.
Mr. Crossley.
Yeah, one of the things I think is important, and Miss Engel spoke to it, is Medicaid, and a lot of people find themselves in a situation looking for help from Medicaid because they don't have health insurance, and a lot of people on the lower end of the income scale don't have life insurance or health insurance. I'm sorry, because where they work doesn't provide it because they work in a lower income area. And I'd like to see, and I'd like to work towards have more job training in high school for people in trades. I grew up in a trade, and there's a thing coming where all of us old guys have retired, and there's not a lot of younger people going into the trades, and you're going to wait for days to get services. They're good paying jobs, and all my people that work for me all had health insurance courtesy of Sharp Long Heating and Cooling, and so I would like to see that, and I think that would help with the Medicaid problem, not the ones that aren't able to work, but the ones that are working but can't get insurance. So thank you.
Mr. Strickler.
Yeah, my priority, and of course there are a number of them, but for me, public education is my priority. We were fortunate this year with the budget where it was to be able to fund it more than we have in the past, to fund transportation for the first time, but there's no guarantees that that's ongoing. And I think for a community like Lee's Summit, our public education is critical for our growth. And that's not just our K through 12. That also includes, that does include vocational training. That also includes community college, and includes great places like the Missouri Innovation Center here. So I think we need to make sure that we continue to fund it and honestly get us to where we're fully funded the way we were a few years back before we sort of moved the goalposts back a bit.
Mr. Burrows.
Focusing on the positive, I'm very interested in focusing on STEM funding for public schools. Currently, we're working on a program that would look to serve underserved communities both in the urban and the rural areas, using both corporate and government resources. Two of the areas that are kind of suffering right now and that are in huge demand for folks, both healthcare and aviation. I can tell you right now that nationwide there's a nursing shortage, and as a matter of fact, in Missouri, 2/3 of our counties do not have a primary care physician. So what are folks doing? They're utilizing urgent care and they're utilizing emergency rooms for their very basic healthcare needs. I think Missouri could really do something well by introducing STEM that gets kids into the healthcare area. The other one would be aviation. There is a huge shortage of pilots currently in the United States. And, working with Civil Air Patrol, like I mentioned earlier, we have some incredible aviation programs that are either free or at very low cost to youth. And getting them into these schools is a plan of mine.
Okay. Representative Engel.
One of my primary focuses will continue to be working on our child welfare system here in the state of Missouri. One of the things that we've seen, unfortunately, in the last few years is a depletion in the workforce in the child welfare system across the state. And what that means is that we have fewer people checking in on the welfare of the kids that are the most vulnerable and the most at risk of harm. And so I've been working with the Department of Social Services, as well as the governor's office and the attorney general's office, to find solutions to this problem, because this is something that affects all of us. This isn't a political issue. Child welfare should never be politicized. It's something that affects all of us. It affects the most vulnerable in our communities. And I'm always looking at the most evidence-based practices to employ in our children's division, and to try to recruit staff that will be able to retain as well. This is something that is incredibly important to me, as well as working on expanding our public safety resources in all of our communities, including especially mental health resources. We often talk about mental health resources, but we don't fund them appropriately. That's something that I'm constantly focused on.
Thank you. This next question, we'll start with Mr. Crossley. Have you read and do you support House Bill 4, sports gaming, that was introduced in this special session? House Bill number 4, and that was to allow sports betting, sports gaming. Do you have any comments on it, or would you like to?
As far as gaming, not much like Kansas, I don't gamble, so I can't. I wouldn't speak to it from the standpoint of gambling. We have casinos, we have other gaming in Missouri. I'm not opposed to it. I just don't know how it would be handled. The regulations behind it, I couldn't speak well to that. I'm not against gaming. It's for decisions if that's what they decide to do.
Mr. Strickler?
Yes, I do support House Bill 4. I do support sports gaming. We are losing tax revenue to Kansas right now. We're losing tax revenue to other states surrounding Missouri, and I do think that's something we should do. I had one person on the door when I was knocking talking about driving over to Kansas to do his sports betting. So I think it's a source of revenue that we're losing out on, and I do support it.
Mr. Burrows?
I would agree. I would support House Bill 4 as well. Folks go to Vegas regularly to do the very thing that they're prohibited from doing here in Missouri, and it just doesn't make sense, especially if we can tax it and make additional revenues for the various projects that, will do well.
Representative Engel?
Yes, I absolutely support House Bill 4. It was a shame that we weren't able to get that passed out of the House and the Senate this last year, as we watched Kansas successfully pass it and gain our tax revenue. We have Missourians go over there. We also have Missourians go over to Illinois to place their bets. And so it's a shame to watch them betting on the Chiefs over in Kansas or over in Illinois, when we could be getting that revenue here and applying it to our infrastructure and our public schools.
Okay, this next question will start off. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Sarapoy.
I was taking bets on that. As we talked, I support the sports betting, but it's tied up down there between Grays, as we talked about, which is the illegal video terminals, and then expansion of VLTs. The filing of it in the special session was kind of a stunt because was way past the governor's call. It'll be introduced again next year. We'll see what happens. It's tough down there to get some of this stuff done when it gets tied together like that. Dave Schatz was the guy that's trying to get rid of Grays, so that probably is gone now. But VLTs are still going to be a part of that package, I'm afraid. And it'd be great if we could pass it, but I don't know if we can do one without the other. And there's not a lot of support for the other.
Thank you. All right, this next question will go to Mr. Strickler. Thought experiment. Assuming that House Bill 4 or any incarnation of it, sports gaming, does pass, how would you ensure that the funding goes to what it's intended to go towards and ensure that the source is not being directed elsewhere?
I probably would say that, first of all, again, I do hope it passes. We have a pretty spotty record of that in Missouri right now. Casino money is supposed to go to fund education, and the problem is you can move money from one pocket to another one pretty easily in the state. So, I think we should try, but I know that it's a hard task to get that to continue to be, whether it's for education or to any other source, because it tends to go into the general revenue fund.
Okay, Mr. Burrows?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a problem a lot of states have. I would say that Missouri is pretty singular in its success that they've had with the Department of Natural Resources, with their ability to raise funds and then essentially sequester those funds for lands and maintaining our game. They've done it to the point that the General Assembly has tried to find out a variety of ways to try to get at that money. Maybe what we do is we look at the model of what they've established and try to do it in a similar manner. So I think it can be done. You just got to be strict about it. If it's going to go towards education or it's going to go towards healthcare, or it's going to go, you earmark it and it goes into that pot and that's all it's used for.
Representative Engel?
I've had the honor of being appointed to and serving on the Special Committee on Government Oversight for the last 2 years, and I would say it's arguably one of the most important things I've done during my time in the legislature is holding our government agencies accountable to the people that they are supposed to be serving, making sure that they're adhering to the laws, making sure that they're adhering to the policies that they themselves have written, and making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. So whether it's the Department of Transportation, whether it's the Department of Revenue, whether it's the Department of Social Services, I believe that we need to be stalwart warriors for the taxpayers and ensuring that the departments are doing what they're supposed to be doing and upholding the law. And so we've been really great at bringing media attention to that and then holding their feet to the fire and assuring that they are doing what the law details them to do. And I will continue to do that if reelected.
Senator Serpoy?
Thanks. We just on this special session, we had a tax cut, and we didn't cut from any particular program. It's coming out of GR. We have our child services in Jackson County has about 80% turnover. We have to increase their wages at some point. I think if this generates additional revenue, I think much of it should go into the general revenue fund so it can be spent on stuff that we need to, because we just did a tax cut, like I said. I think it's a reasonable way to do things, but in 4 or 5 years, that cut could be could cause a little more funding issues than maybe we predicted. And I think that might be a new source of revenue that it's not that big, but I think it'll be something that would help us if that's the case.
Mr. Crossley?
Yeah, the source of revenue from gaming, I don't know how much it is, but if it's sold to the taxpayers as being used for, like education was for the casinos when it's passed, and then they just don't fund the other part of it. They take that and fund. It's kind of like a switch and bait, and so. I think that the best way to raise tax revenue is provide great jobs for people, and I'll harp on what I just spoke about a while ago. That'd be a great way to raise revenue, is make sure everybody's fully employed to the maximum capability. And there's some people working two $15 an hour jobs where they could be working one $40 an hour job, and they wouldn't be a drag on society. They actually be contributing to society. So that's.
Okay, so the next question will start with Mr. Burrows. With the Dobbs decision, the Missouri abortion law does not include rape and incest as exceptions. Should this be changed? Please explain your answer.
So I come at this as I look at how your average Missourian looks at this. I've got 3 daughters and a wife, and they look to me and they're like, "Well, what is your take on this, Dad?" A vast majority of Americans are for fairly restrictive controls on second and third trimester, and I think I can get behind that. Okay, first trimester, that's more of a gray area. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that after conception that it's just a clump of cells, because the people I know who, when they're pregnant, they say they're expecting a baby, and I think that's a fairly common sense notion. But I'm also sensitive to situations where you may have children that are raped, that there's incest and things like that. And in that case, I don't want to be the person that is limiting their access to an abortion. I think we have to make exceptions in those cases. So,
Representative Engel.
Absolutely. We should absolutely change the law. When House Bill 126 passed back in 2019, I stood on the floor and stated that children will be forced to bear the offspring of their rapist should this bill pass. And that is now the current law of the land. That is a shame and is a travesty. And I am absolutely against it. I believe in a woman's right to choose. I believe that most Americans and most Missourians believe that too. Whether or not you're pro-life for yourself, most people most people would say, I am pro-life for myself, but I don't want to make that decision on the behalf of someone else. That, my friends, is being pro-choice. It's saying that I'm not the expert on someone else's life and their circumstances, whether it's medical, whether it's religious, whatever reason it may be. Maybe there is rape and incest, maybe there is domestic violence going on. We're not the expert on other people's lives, and they should be able to make those decisions for themselves.
Senator Serpoy.
Thank you. Overturning Roe is something I've hoped for 50 years. Whether I was pro-choice or pro-life, I think it's a state decision, and the Constitution says nothing about abortion, and I'm glad they finally done that. I think Alabama has this about right. They have an exception for rape and incest, and I've read their law, and I think it's someplace that once all the passion dies down, I think that's where most states are. European governments that didn't have a court stepping in and demanding how things are, they've all got laws close to that, and I think that's where we'll end up once all this passion dies down.
Mr. Crossley.
Well, I have a quick answer for a hard question. Is I don't believe there's ever a good time to take an innocent life, and however it was created, that is now alive, and I can't imagine taking someone's life that had done nothing wrong, and that's my answer.
Mr. Strickler.
So I trust women to make that decision, the best decision for their own health care. I do believe it's a very private, very personal decision that the government shouldn't be in the middle of. But by any standard, I think that trigger law that was passed here in Missouri, which doesn't include exceptions for rape or incest, is extraordinarily extreme, and the way it's written, it's also ambiguous. So it makes it difficult for physicians to know when they can do certain kinds of treatment for ectopic pregnancies that threaten the life of the mom. Yeah, I think it should be changed, and I think this is one of those areas where there was such a rush to pass that in 2019 that they didn't look to see what the unintended consequences of this were going to be.
All right, thank you. Before my next question, just as a reminder, there are cards in the back. If you have questions, please go back and write them and then raise them up, and somebody will get, oh, there we go, good. We want your answers or questions from the audience.
In the meantime, this next question is going to start with Representative Engel. Something near to my heart. With additional funds for transportation and infrastructure coming from the federal government, what are your priorities for sustainable use of these funds?
What a great question. There are so many amazing projects that are happening in this area, and I was really, really pleased to work with Senator Serpoy to get some ARPA funding for a sewer project that is going to tremendously expand this area, and I hope for generations to come. These are some once-in-a-lifetime opportunities that we have to really invest in our communities to make it sustainable, whether we're talking about walking paths, pedestrian paths, biking paths like we have over in the Longview area. We have an amazing opportunity to expand Lee Summit and expand this area into the next generation. And I really hope that we're really thoughtful about those projects, and that we we have a legislature that is willing to fully invest. Sometimes we're given the opportunity, or we have those monies available, but we choose not to invest them, which would be a shame.
Senator Serpoy?
Thank you. Like Carrie said, there's ARPA money available, still is. I think there'll be additional things looked at this year. Missouri's got a lot of issues, a lot of delayed maintenance. We need to do something with I-70. I drive I-70 all the time. I find the crowding of it's worse than the traffic. I mean, than the condition of it. I know they tell me the subsurface is way beyond its life, but it still seems to be in pretty good shape actually most days. I think MoDOT's done a wonderful job, but it does need to have a lane added. And numbers I've heard is anywhere from $2.5 to about $4 billion to do that across the state. So that needs to be done. And if you just drive down it sometime and count the bridges you go over, it's going to have to be reconstructed to add another lane in each direction. The numbers add up very quickly. The gas tax we've passed, I think will help that going forward. We still have the cheapest gas of any state around us, and I think that will continue. So I'm excited that we're actually going to get some of this stuff done. Even some of the counties we have only got 3,000 or 4,000 people. They can't afford much, and we help pay for that, and that's a good thing.
Mr. Crossley?
Yeah, as far as the gas tax, it's I hate saying this out loud, but we did need a gas tax. We have delayed maintenance on our infrastructure because we didn't have the money to do it. And so, as with like in your household budget, if you're having a tough year, you don't paint that year. You wait till the next year. Well, if you don't paint the next year, your house starts having rotten wood, and we've got a lot of rotten wood in our highways. And it's because of delayed maintenance. And so we do need to be careful about how we spend taxpayers' money, but when we have opportunity for ARP funds and those types of things that we can be smart about using and take care of our roads, and then if we have money left over, that we do things for the communities that can't afford stuff, and then even our community here in Lee Summit, we have great trails and paths, and we could use, you can use more opportunity, more people spending more time outside, spending time together with their children, riding bikes. It's kind of exciting to see that happen.
Mr. Strickler?
Yes, so I'm very excited about the opportunity that we have with the ARPA funds. Right now, Missouri is 45th in the revenue per mile that we put into supporting our highways and our roads. And so this will be an opportunity for us to frankly fix some of the challenges that we've had. I also am hopeful from an infrastructure that we can use it to help expand broadband in some of the areas of Missouri that don't have it. It's one of those things that can help those small towns, the rural areas, to keep more of their workers and to hopefully reinvigorate those communities. So I'm excited about the opportunity, and we need to find the best use of that money.
Mr. Burrows?
I've spent about 25 years in disaster response, and I will tell you right now that Missouri is in crisis mode with regard to its bridges and its levees, especially up in northern Missouri. Every time we get a significant amount of rain in the spring, there is flooding, and it impacts the cities and towns of Missourians across the state. I think ultimately, having surveyed many of these bridges and levees firsthand, this money can be put towards, instead of disaster response, disaster mitigation. I know that Sam Graves is pushing hard for this, and I support him 100% in that regard.
Okay, the next question comes from the audience, and interestingly enough, we got the same question 3 times. And so it sounds like an important question for the audience, so I'm going to ask it this way. So we'll start with Senator Serpoy. What are your thoughts on the COVID response, and what should we do as a state differently in the next health emergency?
Well, what we did when that first hit, of course, it caught a lot of people, a lot of health departments off message, really, because they hadn't dealt with something like that. What we did in Jeff City was, what bothered me was around here we have the Kansas City Health Department and the Jackson County Health Department. Independence used to have a health department. They got rid of theirs. I think they're rebuilding it now. But we've empowered the health departments to make these decisions when health crises arise. And so what we've done, I forget the bill number now, but we passed it that said The health department still have the ability to make these decisions, but when they do, within 30 days of doing something like the mask mandates or the shutdowns, the elected body of that political subdivision has to weigh in and say yes or no. That way, they can do something for 30 days, because I'm old enough, my oldest sister had polio. I'm old enough to remember when diseases actually mattered. And I know they still do, but I'm saying back before we had the science we have now. And so they can still do something if an emergency arises, but within 30 days, the Jackson County Legislature has to come in and say yes or no what we're doing, or the City Council. They won't always do what we want because they're pretty much on the other team also, but at least there's a way to complain to somebody and have your voice heard. The health director doesn't care.
Thank you.
I think that the response was never heard of such thing. But people were afraid at the very beginning it was going to be a horrible disease and we could catch it just by going outside. And we found out pretty quickly it wasn't that bad. But giving the health departments the ability to act as a legislative body and create laws and rules and ordinances also was wrong. And I agree with the senator. I think 30 days is plenty of time for a health department and to get it together, and then the legislative body that's under that controls that health department, they take over and they legislate, and that's what legislatures are supposed to do. They're supposed to make the hard decisions, because that is a hard decision to shut down an economy, we still have the effects of shutting down the economy in Jackson County, in the state of Missouri, and in the United States. We're still feeling the effects of it, and it's going to be a while before we ever recover from it.
So we suffered through the worst public health crisis that this country's had in over 100 years. I'm surprised to hear that it wasn't that bad. We lost, I'm not sure what the number is, at least 700,000, 800,000 people died from COVID, including people close to me. So it was a tough situation, and I know that our hospitals, our nurses, our doctors, and our public health people were doing the best job they could. I don't think they were getting a whole heck of a lot of support from Jeff City, very honestly. They tended to get attacked for the decisions they were making, and some of those decisions were right, some of those decisions were wrong. But you know, we don't know what's going to happen, how COVID's going to evolve, if it's going to evolve. Hopefully we've learned from it, and hopefully our legislature will dive into the data, support our experts, and find a way to keep the economy going, but also to save lives and to keep people out of the hospital.
Mr. Burrows.
So what do you do with something like a threat that you get from COVID? First of all, you got to understand what the threat is. You have to understand it clearly and accurately measure the threat, which we did a terrible job with, okay? And then you need to implement useful measures. The facts were that children had a 0% mortality rate under COVID. It's the way it is, 0%. It's not to say that there weren't a handful that died, but there was 0% out of 330 million people. And yet, what did we do? We went to virtual schooling. Our kids lost 2 years of education. It was worthless. And they won't be able to make that up. That's just a fact. We saw government shut down small business while leaving large businesses open. It destroyed our middle class. We lost $3 trillion in economic production across the nation. Federal funds created the inflation that we have. And Florida was left open, New York was closed, and the mortality rate was no different, state to state.
Thank you. Representative Engel.
I want to start by saying that 21,695 Missourians died from COVID. That's almost 22,000 Missourians in less than 2 years. And I want to say that one of the things, as someone who had to teach my children at home during virtual schooling, and I understand firsthand how daunting that was, we did that to protect the teachers as well. We did that to protect who the children live with in their homes, who may be immunocompromised, who may take COVID home and kill their grandmother or kill their next door neighbor. We were dealing with something that we had never It was a novel coronavirus. This is something that we had never seen before in the history of the world. This is something that we hadn't seen since the early 1900s with the Spanish flu, with something that was this contagious that we had never dealt with. Science is all about adaptation, and we have to adapt to new science. When we get new information, we adapt to it. And so that's what we did.
All right, thank you. This next question is going to start with Mr. Crossley. You'll be the first answer here. What are your thoughts on recreational marijuana, and do you support allowing it in Missouri?
Well, it's coming up on the ballot, so my thoughts on marijuana is I don't use it. I don't drink alcohol, so but alcohol is served in every grocery store and every convenience store. It's regulated, and I believe marijuana is going to be the same way. I wish the legislature would have wrote a bill that was a good bill instead of Amendment A, but it's here and we need to deal with it. Because I don't agree with something doesn't mean I can't. When you say support it, I don't support the use of marijuana, but I do support the state regulating the use of marijuana, the buying and the selling, the raising of it. If you're going to sell it commercially, I think the government's got to be involved. If you're going to do it personally, grow it in the backyard, as long as you don't blow it over my fence, I'm okay with it. So,
Good, Mr. Strickland.
So yeah, I agree with Mr. Crossley on much of this. I do support legalizing recreational marijuana for folks over 21 years old. I think there's a need to expunge the records of folks who had nonviolent marijuana offenses as well, to make them part of, to purge that so it's not on their record. And I do believe it's better to have it regulated and taxed as opposed to unregulated and in the black market. Amendment 3, it does have some good and some things that are maybe not so good in it. But part of the reason that it does is that we couldn't get a good bill through the legislature, and that's what I think we should have done. Hopefully that's something that we can make better if Amendment 3 passes.
Mr. Burrows.
Well, my thoughts with regard to recreational marijuana is that I don't do marijuana, and very few of my friends do. I'm not a supporter of recreational marijuana, but I do feel like it should be decriminalized, because ultimately you've got laws regarding the use and possession that have ruined the lives of otherwise productive citizens. Now, you want to ask whether or not government should be involved in the regulation and taxation of it. This is where I'm going to come out and say no. The government is involved in so many things. They do not need to be involved in this. I do not want tax dollars from folks doing marijuana. Thank you very much. Like I said, it's not my thing, but I'm not going to prevent other consenting adults from doing this. The key word's adults. Children shouldn't have access to this.
Representative Engel.
I agree with those before me. I believe that it should be legalized and decriminalized, and it should be for adult use only, 21 and up. I believe that there are a lot of ways that we could utilize this funding for things that are really important to a lot of people in our communities. One of the things about medical marijuana is that we use those to help fund veterans' homes. Our veterans in our communities are treated abysmally, and I know you all know that. And we could do so much more for them, for access to treatment, for better quality of life and living. There are so many different opportunities that we could have with this source of revenue that states around us are seeing. And I'm really excited about being able to utilize that additional revenue source. And I'm also excited about talking about expungement for nonviolent marijuana offenders and getting them back into the workforce. We have a workforce shortage in this state and across the country, and we need workers, and I'm excited to get them in there.
Senator Searpoy.
Thanks. I'm going to vote no on the ballot initiative because I think it's the way it's written is bad law. This is what happens when you have just one group writing an initiative petition. The medical marijuana they passed a few years ago, it's been in the courts ever since. It's going to be in the courts for a long time. We were working towards, I know the legislature is frustrating, but we were working towards a medical marijuana for defined diseases and ailments when this initiative was passed 2 or 3, 4 years ago. And I'm just concerned this new one is going to be just as bad. As far as the criminality of it, we passed an expungement law a while back. So people that had some minor drug-related offenses could go to the courts and get them removed if they, I think it was 7 years after you had it, if you had been living without other problems. I'm completely supportive of decriminalizing the nonviolent part of that. And so, but I'm going to vote no on the ballot initiative.
All right, sure. Mr. Strickler, this one's for you. Do you feel housing affordability is a local or state issue? Please explain how the state can help with this issue.
I think it's both. I think it's both a local and a state issue. Locally, I've knocked on thousands of doors since April, talking to folks across our district, and there are a lot of concerned seniors in particular about the housing out here. I've talked to young people who talked about wanting to get out here, wanting to stay, and it really is hard in Lee's Summit. I do think it's a state issue as well, and I think there's things that we can do to help with property taxes, especially for those on fixed incomes, those seniors. The legislature can help on those, but it's a big issue for us in Lee's Summit. If we want to have workers who can live in our community, we need to have housing for them.
Mr. Burrows?
I think it's both, affordable housing is both a local and a state issue. You know, my parents moved us here in 1979. Jackson County used to be one of the lowest tax rates for property taxes in the state. Currently, I think a lot of people think it still is, but it's actually number 2 next to St. Louis. You know, there is a 15% cap on raising taxes, but the Jackson County Legislature has paid $18 million of taxpayer funds to have Tyler Industries come out and do assessments, physical assessments of our property, which will allow them to raise our taxes by up to 45%. Now, who that's going to affect? That's going to affect the poor, and that's going to affect folks on fixed incomes. And they're not going to be able to afford their taxes when they go up. And this is a significant problem. That's ultimately why I'd like to push forth legislation which will do away with property taxes for anybody over the age of 65 in their primary residence. I think this is what we owe the folks who've worked so hard to get themselves to the sunset years. They need to be able to stay in their homes.
Representative Engel?
I agree that this is both a local and state issue. I would be hesitant to absolutely stop all property taxes for folks over the age of 65 because that is a huge source of revenue for how we fund public safety like the police, and it would be a shame to defund them in that manner. I do support supplementing our circuit breaker tax credit, which we already have, with credit toward larger increases in property taxes for low income and moderate income homeowners, or implementing an income and age limited homestead exemption for homeowners to be layered on top of existing circuit breaker tax credits to provide relief to low income homeowners whose income is too high to qualify. I know that it's hard times for everyone in this area to buy homes all throughout Jackson County, whether you're talking about Lee Summit or Kansas City. It's hard. And the cost of living is going up around us, and we need to be really cognizant of ways to bring that down. I'm interested in reducing taxes on groceries, diapers, feminine hygiene products, things like that really affect the cost of living for everyone.
Senator Serpoy?
Thank you. I personally think that affordable housing is housing you can afford. People talk about Lee Summit, it's a wonderful place to live. I couldn't afford to move here until I was 50. I don't think that's a crime. I think that's just the facts of my job, my savings, my wife and I working together to go where we wanted to go. As far as, I think what you're asking about is the subsidized low-income housing for seniors and families that we're doing. Pardon me? Just housing. Oh, housing affordability, okay. Well, I agree with the property tax. We've got to do something about it. Jeff Coleman out in Grain Valley's got a bill that I think will make a sizable difference, not this year or next, but in 5 or 10 years. It puts a cap on what they can do. We need to do something. Low-income, very low-income people have the circuit breaker. It's the people that make they're making $20,000 to $50,000 or $60,000 a year. They're being crushed by these property taxes. It's amazing what I'm paying 3 times a year in property taxes what my first house cost me as far as house payments. It is, I'm stunned by what's happening, and car taxes. We've got to do something with it. It's tough to do though because it's constitutional and the assessments are a strange thing.
The problem with the housing is it's a couple things, but I think I'll go back to my very first opening statement. If the people that are working are making the best wage they can, they're going to be able to afford the housing they can afford. As the senator said, my first house was 678 square feet, and it was over at First and Lakeview in Lee Summit. It was a very small house, but that's the house we could afford. It was a very small house. They would call it a tiny house today. I'd be on the tiny house show. But we built a new house in 1984, and we've been in it ever since. But our taxes over there are tremendous, and every year it just gets more. And then with inflation, I talked to several. I had a lady call me today about, well, can you ever get a bill through the legislature that reduces property tax for people over 65? I said, I believe there's stuff that's in the legislature now to that effect. People that buy a house and live in it 40 years, and I've been there, my house since 1984, why are they paying the property taxes on an elevated price? I'll quit talking.
All right, thank you. All right, we have a number of questions from the audience related to schools, so I'm going to consolidate them into 2 questions, just to warn you. So the first question, we'll start with Mr. Burrows. What is the role of the state legislature with regards to the governance of local school boards and school districts?
Well, I think first and foremost, the state has a requirement to ensure that it's that our students are safe. I think some of the concerns that we have right now are that who has access to the schools and what are our plans should you have an active gunman. Okay, I'm all for having armed school resource officers. I think there's also concern with regard to what the students are learning, whether, a school is pushing CRT on its students, whether or not they're adhering to Title IX with regard to, the sanctity and the safety of girls' sports, and whether or not boys are participating in that. I'm a big fan of local governance, quite frankly. I feel like that's what our country's based upon. But we've got some kind of kooky things that are being done right now at the local level that I think the state should have some say on.
Okay, thank you. Representative Engel?
I believe that the state should provide the framework for the governance that happens at the school board level and set the framework for how our public education system is both funded and appropriated. And then we need to be hands off. I think that the local elected school boards and the folks that are engaged in that community, the ones that are paying taxes, are the ones that are holding that school board and that school accountable for what they're doing within that community. I think a lot has been politicized about public schools over the last few years, and a lot of that started during COVID, and it has been a lot of those hot button issues that have been demonizing our teachers and driving them away from that profession and making it harder for them to teach, making it harder for administrators to do what they need to do to make our schools function. And the kids are picking up on it. And I think that when we've done such a disservice to this public institution, and it's a shame that it's been politicized so folks can profit off of the privatization after funding private schools and whatnot.
Thank you. Senator Serpoy?
Thanks. I think the way it's set up right now, we give a lot of autonomy to school boards, and I think that's a good thing. We have what accreditation means, what test scores have to be, and things like that, and I think that's good oversight with the funding we provide. I've had a lot of Republicans, when I tell them this, that school boards are the place to get these things changed. They get mad at me because they want Jeff City to do it. We're not that smart in Jeff City. There's 540 some school boards in this state, or school districts. And we can't oversee them all and make them all run like they should run. We trust the parents to elect school boards to do things and reflect their values. Lee Summit had some issues. Last spring, Lee Summit made a couple of changes. I think they're going to make a couple more changes this coming school election. And that's how you change your school board. You could have a complete change in Jeff City, and you don't want them mandating this stuff if we can mandate other stuff. And so that's the best way to deal with this is locally. It's frustrating, but that's how the system works, and that's how it should work. And it's much easier to change your school board member than it is to change your state senator.
Thank you.
I agree with the senator. I think the problem with people had with school is a lot of people were asleep, and there's always in any society a few people that would like to take over and take charge, and we were all we weren't paying attention, and now that people are paying attention, they want to be heard, and so it did get very politicized for the last couple years, and I think that local is better. I think mom and dad know what their child needs in the way of education. They know there's people in the community that want to serve on a school board to help guide the school. There's got to be some oversight from the state, but as far as the state sticking their nose in too far, once the state gets involved, it's hard to change. But like he said, you can change your local people every year. You have school board elections, you have municipal elections. So I think we need to be more involved in our children's education. Even people that don't have children anymore, never had children, they need to be involved and paying attention to what's going on, not just sitting at home.
Thank you.
Is it
Mr.
Thursday
Strickland.
night school board meeting?
So I agree that this is primarily a local issue, but as the husband of a retired public school teacher, I think we need to do more to support our schools. We've got great schools, but here in Lee Summit we're real fortunate. But I'd love to see the rhetoric turned down, dialed down. We hear a lot about CRT, usually from people who don't have kids in the school system. And everyone defines CRT differently, so it makes it really hard to have, worthwhile conversations. I would like for us to really try to get past that and get into the issues that matter with regard to the kids. And so I'm all for local control and not something that we should be legislating further in Jeff City.
Thank you. All right, the second question related to school districts, we'll start with Representative Engel, and that is, should funding currently allocated for the foundation formula for schools be used to fund charter and private schools, vouchers, and scholarships?
No, it should not. So the biggest difference that I would say between public schools and charters and privates is that they do not have those school boards that we were just talking about. They don't have locally elected, there's no one to be held accountable. Oftentimes these are business owners, sometimes they're out of state. They're not held accountable at that level to the taxpayers that are funding them. So if you don't like what's happening at one of these schools, you have no form of recourse. You can't go to a meeting, you can't vote out that school board member, as we were talking about earlier. So I think that that's a huge issue. One of the other things in dealing with religious institutions for residential facilities that I've learned is that most religious institutions do not want state oversight. When you start accepting public funding at your private institution, you're going to get oversight. And I don't think that they're thinking that part through. I don't think that that's what they want, is DESE coming in and setting different standards and monitoring a lot of what they're doing. And so we have a lot of ways there are scholarships and other ways to get kids into private schools if that's the route that the parents want to take.
Thank you. Senator Serpoy.
If I was king, this school system we have would be nothing like this. We would empower parents to do what's best for their kids. We'd have a public school system for parents that weren't involved, but we have lots of parents that are very frustrated. And when we talk about charter schools and things like that, it's always one building. Kansas City's public schools right now is accredited, but they have buildings. If they stood on their own, they would have failed 30 years ago. We never close them. We always talk about closing the charter schools. Let's close the public schools that don't perform well. Those numbers are hidden in the district's overall performance. It's awful. We have failed those kids for 30 years in some neighborhoods. We need to do something to empower those parents. Those parents want just the same thing for their kids as we want for our kids. We need to empower those parents to do what's good for those kids, and what's best for those kids and those schools is the threat of parents and customers leaving them.
Mr. Cross.
Yeah, I think the money should follow the student. It causes, it's like I said, we have a lot of fail. At least I'm lucky. It's not, we're not lucky, we're blessed. We have great schools. Some problems, but we have a great school system. Great teachers, great administrators. It sure takes a lot of money to run this place, the school system. But I think if the money follows the student, in which it would be in a charter school, if that money followed the student and the charter school wasn't doing a good job, the money leaves and goes someplace else. I ran a business, and so I always had to provide for my customers to get them to use me continually every time. I had to provide a great service, and when I didn't provide that great service, well, the money walked, and I tried to get it back. So I think the money should go with the student.
I don't believe that public funding should go to private parochial schools. To me, as the name suggests, public funding should go to public schools that have public oversight and not to private schools. Private schools are great, charter schools are great, but I think our public money needs that oversight. And we don't tend to, we talk about the problem with it and with expanding charter schools, which I'm very much against, is that you start to have parallel systems, which is more costly. We don't have multiple systems of fire prevention. We don't have multiple police systems that are all funded by the public. And I don't think we should expand that beyond where it is today in the public education either.
Mr. Burrows.
Rich parents send their kids to good schools. People in the inner city and in the rural areas don't have that option. All I'm saying is make a level playing field. Give every parent the option to send their kid where the school is best. There's no such thing as public funding. It's taxpayer dollars. It's your money, it's my money. I want to be able to send my kid where my money belongs. And I do believe that money should follow the student, and I think that we should make schools compete. And when we say that, well, there's no, competition, well, compare UPS and FedEx against the U.S. Postal Service, okay? And tell me that they aren't great, okay? We can make this happen. We can make a better future for kids by allowing the money to follow them. And, we had 20 years of an unaccredited school district in Kansas City, Missouri, where millions of children were left. Okay? And these are people of color, the ones we're supposed to care about. And we left them there in that situation. And this is unacceptable.
All right, thank you. This next question, it's from the audience. It's going to be going to Senator Searpoint. Do you believe that the special session being held for the reduction of state income tax is productive or beneficial for the state's financial health?
Again, if I was king, I would have waited a year or two just to see how this shakes out after this federal money is gone. Because right now, my own feeling is there's so much federal money in the system, not just in Jeff City, but all the folks got some money and spending it, which elevated our sales tax revenues. And so I've been told by really smart people on the budget, not people that just want to cut all the time, but people that take it seriously, that will be fine. I just want to make sure we are before we do anything else. I think it's okay. Letting people keep their own money is a wonderful thing. I mean, it's just a no-brainer to me. But we also have funding responsibilities. When I first got elected, our taxes were 6% over $9,000. It's effectively flat after you make $9,000 of taxable income. And today, or as of January 1st, I think it'll be 4.95, headed towards 4.5. That's a 25% cut in those years, and that's a good thing as long as we can still fund the things we need to fund. That's the only concern I have. We'll see. I think we'll be okay because I think we did it in a wise way.
Mr. Crossley.
Yeah, I've done as much reading as I can. I'm not as privy to information as the senator and the representative on the end, but the 4.95 of the first year sounds great for income tax, with it going down to 4.5 if the economy continues to grow. They also, what I've read is the first $14,000 isn't subject to state income tax. And I think that's a good thing because I think it was $9,000 before. I agree. Anytime we can let us have our own money, we know what to do with our money better than any government agency. And we do need to fund government. We need to collect enough revenue to provide the services that we said we're going to provide. We still have, I think, a $5 billion surplus. So we have plenty of money, and we need more of our money back.
Good. Mr. Strickler?
Yeah, so the thing about the bill that was just passed that the governor is likely to be signing here soon if he hasn't already, that certainly benefits, the income tax cut certainly benefits people with money much more than people who don't make near as much. So the top 1% will be getting about $4,200 back per year. If you make $40,000 per year, however, you'll be getting $17 back per year. Now, I don't know that there's going to be a lot of people that whose lives are changed by that $17, because when you decide you're going to give taxes back, you've got all sorts of places you can give taxes back. We could have given back and made the sales tax lower. That would have helped everyone equally. We could have used it to reduce property taxes, found a way to give credits. That would have helped seniors. But instead, we gave the money back to the folks who needed it the least.
Well, whether or not the reduction of the state income tax is good or bad, my wife and I briefly lived in Florida, and I would remind folks that Florida and Texas are some of the most profitable states in the union, and as a matter of fact, they have no income tax, which kind of surprised us when we got down there. I hadn't researched that particular bit, but I was kind of happy to find out they didn't have any, and they still managed to have really nice schools and roads and government services. It's amazing. And I would say that the lower taxes that we have here in Missouri will likely bring people from out of state, okay? You want people to want to come to your state because it's a happy, healthy environment. And I think this is one of those things that can help towards that. So I'm for it.
Representative Engel?
We already have one of the lowest income tax rates in the entire country. One of the lowest. And what we also have of some of the lowest of is lowest in paid teachers. We also have some of the lowest paid state workers in the country. And we wonder why they're leaving. We wonder why they're leaving to other states. We wonder why we can't have an educated workforce in this state. And it's because we just spent $1 billion so the average Missourian can get $31 back next year. Oh, by the way, the House also tried to change that bill and phase out all corporate income taxes, which would absolutely devastate this state and make us, it would make the Brownback experiment in Kansas look like paradise in comparison. So this is what the State House was trying to do. Thankfully, they stripped that back from the bill, but they are absolutely trying to bankrupt us off of one-time funding that is in our surplus. One-time funding.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is kind of one near and dear to the chamber, so I'm going to ask it. We'll start with Mr. Crossley. And that is, what is the one thing the state legislature can do to help small business?
I think one of the major challenges with small business for me was in employment, is finding workers, people that were qualified, people that could read and write. I made my employees anybody apply for a job, fill out their application at my office so that I knew that they filled it out. Is job training. It's the majority of people that go to high school, some may go to college, but a lot of them don't finish it. And if they had an opportunity while they was in school to be able to explore a trade, they would, when they graduated high school, they'd be immediately employable at $20 to $25 an hour immediately. And trades, they'll get their insurance paid. So they have a company that pays their insurance. And I started hiring people that didn't know anything, and I would invest in them for 2 years. But after a year or two, they paid me back. They paid the company back greatly. And I think job training.
Yeah, I actually, I'm in pretty much the same place as Mr. Crossley on this. I think that what we can do best is to help provide an educated, a trained workforce to help all of our small businesses. And that means greater investment in different kinds of education. K through 12 certainly, but also, as I said earlier, vocational, as well as the kind of programs that Summit Tech has here in Lee's Summit. And we also need more people. We need to make sure our higher education is well funded and that we're getting what we need out of the universities in this state. So all the way, I think it's making a real commitment to education so that we have the workforce we need to keep our small businesses and keep our economy going strong.
Mr. Burrows?
This goes back to one of the things that we mentioned up front about the positive thing. I think that if we focused on more STEM and education and produced, like my colleagues here want, a more educated workforce coming out of school. But, you know, we spend an awful lot of time in education creating folks who are working for others. And I think it would be really nifty if we could have education that actually supports entrepreneurship and a state that provides a tax structure which makes it convenient to start new businesses instead of a drag on them. You know, children come out of the womb as creative thinkers, and sometimes, you know, we force them into boxes. And you know, it'd be nice if we could see, you know, again, more entrepreneurship and more STEM in our schools.
Representative Engel?
I have to agree with my opponent. I think that one of the most important things that we can possibly do is invest in early childhood development. Start that STEM education there. Get them excited, whether it's Legos, whether it's access to computers. These are the things that our kids are going to need going forth. We need to be preparing them for the jobs of today and tomorrow instead of the jobs of yesterday. And whether that's preparing them to go into a four-year university or to go to a union trade school, to have a really good chance at the American dream looks different for different people, and we need to be providing them with an array of opportunities, just like here. Like, this is a great example of things that we could expand statewide, is this innovation campus. Public-private partnerships and public support for entrepreneurs, especially with small businesses, is where we need to be going if we want to grow the economy of tomorrow now.
Thanks. I think that I believe STEM and job-ready stuff. We spent a lot of money. We're still doing it. We've partnered with a lot of community colleges to do that. I know Lee Summit, Blue Springs, they both work with the community colleges to get these kids so they can move through without taking on much debt. One thing I think we need to do too, and this is not just the state, but cities and counties need to make it easier to start a business. All the licensing and gotcha things, it's just very difficult sometimes. If somebody wants to start doing hair, they've got to get all these licenses. It always surprises me because it seems to me if you don't get a good haircut, you're not going back. And so it's not like your heart surgery. But we put so many burdens on these people. People always come to Jeff City and say, we need more rules. Whether you're somebody doing not architectural work, but just gardens and things like that, they want them to force them to get a license. There's always a push to do that, to protect their turf, to make it harder, barriers to entry. We need to lower those. A lot of people like to start businesses. It's just too darn difficult, and that's for the cities and counties as well as the state.
All right, thank you. This next question will be from Mr. Strickler to start with. The roads and bridges in Missouri continue to deteriorate with little support. A gas tax has been established as a funding mechanism, but what additional funding do you propose to address this worsening issue?
Yeah, you're right. We talked some about this earlier. I think the gas tax is helping, certainly, but it's going to continue to be an issue. We've talked also about the use of some of the ARPA funds right now to make investments that we have an opportunity now to do that. So I think we need to do that. But honestly, at some point, if the roads don't get better, we are going to have to make a hard choice and try to bring that forward to the people of Missouri. And if they choose to support it, then that'll be good for the economy. That'll help. If they don't, then we haven't done a good job of selling why it's necessary.
Mr. Burrows?
Well, obviously, we've got the gas tax. You know, you look at Kansas, they've got a really nice turnpike system that is essentially paid for by use. I'm not averse to that, especially when you see the kind of quality that comes with that. But I'm also into thinking outside the box and reaching out for corporate sponsorship for certain key things, whether it's bridges or you know, a certain span of highway, that kind of thing. You know, corporations are oftentimes looking at doing more within the community. Oftentimes there are tax breaks for that kind of thing. And, you know, we need to be reaching out to especially the really successful ones and seeing if they'd be willing to belly up and pay for some roads and bridges, or at least for the maintenance or the improvements.
Representative Engel?
We're gonna the House and the Senate are going to have a really, really incredible responsibility next year when this infrastructure spending package from the Biden administration comes down to our state legislature. We're going to have the opportunity to really, really invest in not just I-70, but also roads and bridges across the state that rural folk really need in order to access their homes, to access their schools. These bridges and roads are in absolutely dire shape, and it cannot be overstated. And so once we use this one-time spending in order to make some of these repairs, we really need to be focused on what that looks like down the road, because this is one-time spending, whether that's increasing the gas tax, whether that's looking at a turnpike situation like my opponent said, like they have in Kansas, like they have in Oklahoma and states around us. These are operable. These work, whether you're talking about the Cherokee Turnpike or wherever. These are things that we can absolutely have here in Missouri and be successful going on through the future.
Thank you. Just a different, I'm not a fan of toll roads. In fact, I've voted against them before. I think the funding, now that we've done the gas tax, I think the funding is stable. I think it'll sustain it, especially with this federal money. We're still every year get a pot of federal money coming down. So I'm not saying it's going to be happy days, but I think our funding issue is done. And because there's no way that people would vote for anything else for the foreseeable future. And so with what MoDOT has told me, that fix that was passed a year or so ago should be enough to get these roads in decent shape going forward. It's going to take a while because there's a lot of delayed maintenance, but I think that it's at least on its way. They see a way to get there.
The question was, where would we find additional funding? And there's only so much money. I don't like the idea of toll roads either. It wouldn't be very popular. At one point we're going to have to figure out, are we going to fix these roads? As you said, we get this one-time payment and we get these roads up to shape. How are we going to continue to maintain them? And that's what the citizens are going to have to decide. Are we going to have higher taxes and have good roads? How are we going to pay for it? Are we going to cut services to have good roads? But there's only so much money, and we have to use it correctly and use it wisely. There's just so much money. That's why our roads are in such bad shape. Delayed maintenance, and once you have delayed maintenance, you have a problem that has to be replaced instead of repaired. Anyway, I don't know where you find extra money.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the last question, we'll give the audience the last word. The question will start with Mr. Burrows. If elected, what will you do next year or over the next few years to work together for greater outcomes in legislation versus political gridlock?
Sergeant Burrows, I'm used to using my command voice. First of all, everybody's human, right? So we got to engage each other as human beings, first and foremost. And there's quite a few things that if you were born, you've grown to a certain age, you have kids, we're going to have commonalities. And what we have to do is we have to find those common areas where we can appreciate and kind of reach across the aisle on, whether it's our children or whether it's, you know, the safety of our roads or bridges. These things shouldn't be political. I mean, ultimately, this comes down to the wellness and the betterment of our communities. And I think that ultimately there are plenty of items that we should be able to come together on. I'm a diplomat by nature. So ultimately, I'll stand by my principles, but there's quite a few things, and I would say probably most things that we could get along on and agree with.
Okay, thank you. Representative Engel.
I would say in a typical legislative year, about 85 to 90% of the legislation that we pass is bipartisan, most unanimous. And so there are so many commonalities in what we see that are important to Missourians. And I think that building relationships in Jefferson City, relationships are really the only commodity in that building. Getting to know someone as a human before you see them as a Democrat or a Republican, getting to know them and their families, and being able to relate to them just like you do your constituents, just like you do your neighbors and friends, and seeing that our differences don't necessarily need to make us enemies, but they can really teach us about each other and how to work together. That's how I've been successful in passing legislation as a member of the super minority, is working with folks on the other side of the aisle and getting them to be champions for the same things that I care about, because ultimately, when we work together, we're doing what's best for all Missourians.
Senator.
Thank you. A lot of people get Washington mixed up with Jefferson City because Washington is such a mess and people talk about it so much. Jefferson City is not nearly that bad. And quite honestly, the last 3 or 4 years, the fighting is more amongst Republicans than it is across the aisle, and that's frustrating. It's more about ego and personality than it is about issues. We agree on a lot of the issues, the Republicans do, but we've had leadership fights and people get mad. I hope that's over. I'm not sure it is. We'll find out soon. And Carrie's right. I'd advise anybody that gets down there at first, build relationships with people, build friendships with people. You don't have to get along with somebody you don't have to agree with somebody to get along with them. And I have found that to be very helpful. There's some issues we're never going to get along on. That's just the nature of the beast. And if you read history books, it's always been that way. But it doesn't mean you've got to treat each other poorly or not be able to get away from the place and enjoy the time together, because we all have the same goal. It's just what we're trying to get to is maybe a little bit different.
Thank you. Thank you.
I agree on that. I think the difference between me and someone else is very little difference. We all have the same basic needs and wants. We want comfort, safety, and security. How we achieve it is maybe where we differ. But I think if we concentrate and focus on the things that we agree on, as the senator said, you get things done. If you and the fighting this last session seems to be within the Republican Party, because there are egos and people that think they know better, and we spend more time. We shouldn't spend any time arguing with each other about each other. We should spend our time debating and figuring out how we're going to better serve Missourians and and for me to make Lee Summit a better city, but and serve people of Lee Summit, but make Missouri a better place, and learn and get the politics out of politics. Is we're here to serve. We're not here to have arguments and have contests with each other. So I think we need to be agreeable and be nice. It's not against the law to be nice.
Mr. Strickler.
Yeah, especially in a community like Lee Summit, in a district like District 34, which is a very 50-50 district. We need to work together. We need to work across the aisle. I look forward to working within the caucus with Representative Engel and hope to work across the aisle with Senator Serpoy. My experience, I've worked in very diverse organizations and have helped to help people with differing viewpoints to find commonality, and that's what I think you have to do. And I totally agree that the relationship piece of it is always important. I worked at Hallmark, and so that whole business is about relationships. And I think we could do a lot worse than to take some of that philosophy down to Jeff City.
Thank you. With that, we are done with the question portion of this program today. But lastly, I would like to give each candidate an opportunity to provide any closing remarks. Please keep your remarks to 1 minute or less. We will reverse the order we used during opening remarks. The first person to close is Representative Carrie Engel from District 35, and so on. You'll have 60 seconds for closing remarks. Representative Engel.
I want to thank you all in the chamber for sponsoring this. I think it's so important that voters hear the policy differences between the folks that are on the ballot. I think that that's the most important thing we can do as a democracy right now is focus on the policy issues. And so I want to thank you all for coming out. I want to thank the chamber again. It has been an honor to serve this district for the last 4 years. It's been the honor of my life to fight for your families, for this community, for your best interests in Jefferson City. It's been my honor to listen to you and to talk to you, even when we disagree. To hear your perspective is the most important thing I can do as your elected official, and to make sure that that view is represented in Jefferson City. So I want to thank you all, and you can learn more about me at carrieingle.com. Thank you.
Well, it is quite an honor to be here, and I appreciate that you took the time to come out and bring these questions to us. I'm pretty basic. My platform is that I'm for funding the police. I'm for enforcing existing laws. I'm for protecting our children. I'm for enacting more STEM in education. And I'm for reducing property taxes for those over 65 on their primary residences. Pretty basic stuff. You know, I served in the military for 8 years. I've served an additional 25 years with Civil Air Patrol, the official auxiliary of the United States. I've worked with a lot of municipalities. Services, I have a service gene. It is what it is. I'm running because there was no Republican running when District 35 was created. And I felt like folks of Lee Summit and Kansas City deserved a choice. My esteemed colleague is a great person. There's no doubt about that. But I wanted to make sure that you had the other flavor that was available, okay? And so here I am, and I appreciate you all being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you very much to the Chamber for hosting this forum. Thanks to all of you for attending and listening and for your questions. To the voters of District 34, I'm a common sense candidate. I'm a problem solver. I want to work to improve opportunities for all the folks in District 34 and for Lee Summit. And I'm not interested in just rubber stamping, a party's agenda. So I've been out since April, knocking doors, almost every day, knocking doors, talking to thousands of people. And they're really asking us as politicians, as legislators, to work together and to work on real issues, not these culture issues that really don't make their lives better. They want real issues and real support from the legislature. So if you believe that state government can help with those kind of issues, I'd appreciate your vote on November 8th.
Thank you.
And thank you for having me out and giving me a chance to see people, and I appreciate everybody coming out. I think one of the things that we keep, the thing that kept resonating tonight is we kept talking about tax revenue and taxing this and taxing that to raise revenue. And I'll go back to my opening thing. If we have people making good money, working in good jobs, the tax revenue goes up. And it solves the problem of not having revenue. I think we have failed our population in not having people, a lot of people have gone to college, and we've had, our government has decided they're going to forgive some college debt. If you came to work for me, in 2 years, I pay you to work for me. I don't charge you to work for me, and you learn an education, you learn a trade. In 2 years, you have a job that pays great money and has great benefits, and you pay taxes. And you're happy to pay them because you're making a lot of money. So I think getting people to work is the right approach.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to also thank you for being here tonight. It's important people get to meet folks that are running for office to represent you, and thank you, Matt, for doing this. If I'm reelected, I'm just going to continue to do what I've done, and I'm a conservative, but I'm also a realist and a pragmatist. I'm more interested in going to Jeff City and trying to do good public policy rather than to get people on Facebook to like me. And we have far too many politicians that care more about Facebook than they do about public policy. And so I will continue to do that. I'll continue to have some people, some of my own team, not liking that, but I'm going to continue to do it. And we'll see how it goes. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all. I want to thank all of you for making this discourse civil. It's refreshing, and I appreciate that. I'd also like to thank the Missouri Innovation Campus for for allowing us to be here this evening. And I'd like to thank this evening's sponsors, AT&T, the Missouri Association of Trial Attorneys, St. Luke's Health Systems, Lee Summit Tribune, and Inspire for partnering with the Chamber. We appreciate our audience attending this evening. We thank you for your engagement, your questions, your interest, and for being a part of this important process. Lastly, we have a challenge, and that is we've done our part. We've given you the candidates. We've given you the ability to ask them questions. You understand their positions. Now it's your job. You need to vote. And so get out on November 8th and do your duty. So thank you all, and good night.